now. Hello and welcome. I am Dr. Jamie Kunkle, joined by Dr. Janell Payne. We are here again to talk about some tales of the trenches in complex chronic illness practice. Today, we're going to have a really fun topic that I'm sure a lot of people have been thinking about lately, as their health insurance has been renewed for the year and their premiums probably went up a whole bunch and all this kind of thing. We're going to talk about the differences in insurance-based models of healthcare and cash pay. Not any one of them is inherently wrong per se. There are some systemic issues that we'll get into about, maybe why we're not seeing a lot of effective changes in healthcare and the insurance companies and all this lovely stuff. And as individual practitioners, our own opinions and experiences working in both of these systems, because we both have, really. So, without further ado, let's get started. Janelle, so what kind of practice do you run? Is it cash or is it insurance? What's the deal?
Yeah, good morning, Jamie. I typically it's fee for service, so I run a cash pay practice. And
Ah,
my very first year in practice, I took insurance, and that was an interesting model. I can say that the time expended and the return was incongruent. So I
mhm.
quickly learned that I had to go to a cash pay model to just prevent burnout, you know,
Yeah.
ultimate destruction.
Yeah, well, that's fair. I have a similar story, honestly. My first 6 years of practice or so was all in the insurance systems. As I started to do more of the work that you guys know me to do, the chronic illness and other things like this, it became a lot more challenging for a lot of reasons. And I think most of it had to do with, some of the things we talked about before, like spending more time with patients, not getting paid for that time, uh, trying to use cutting edge treatments or treatments outside of standard of practice, or you know using drugs off label or something. It's like, oh, so many challenges kind of come up, and unfortunately a lot more work, a lot more staff needed, a lot more everything needed. And within a 5 year period they may ask for money back from you. I mean, and there's all kinds of things. It ended up sort
Oh,
of
I forgot about
crashing out.
that. Yes.
Yeah.
So did you treat complex chronic illness in the first 5 years?
Yeah, I
What
started
was
to,
the route?
I kind of went into it in that case, as in I started off doing sort of a mix and mash of things. Like I was doing more procedural therapies because I was also an acupuncturist, for example, and I would do body work and adjustments and physical medicine and structure medicine and stuff like that. But I was also kind of doing primary care. Kind of, I know, and we'll talk about sort of the kind of primary care model of naturopathic medicine too. But I was doing primary care for some people, at least by for all intents and purposes, and it just sort of morphed into more of a complex illness practice as I sort of started to collect those people, and then I ended up joining a practice that was focused on a lot of complex chronic illness, was in the insurance system, but focused more on family medicine and pediatrics. So yeah, mouthful, but that was kind of the long and short of it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I feel like that's a really common trajectory for a lot of people, just
Mhm.
kind of enter into it. And you hit the nail on the head when you said like you kind of start accumulating those patients, right? Because
Mhm.
once you see one, you start seeing patterns. And so it's hard to unsee it once you see it.
Yeah.
And what works for one patient, you're thinking, hey, let's apply this over here. Maybe this will,
Yeah.
I had
I
a
mean, I
similar.
know I've known folks that have come out of school and been like, I'm going to work with chronic illness, and they get the few residency opportunities that might be out there with the few clinics that will accept them. And they start off that way. And I've seen people do that, and it is possible, but most of us sort of just kind of stumble into it almost in some ways. I mean, we have a probably a little bit of a natural talent to it in terms of who we are, personality, how we handle these patients, all these different things. But it is sort of a fall into it effect in a lot of cases. Most people, even outside of naturopathic medicine, MDs and DOs, often start in family medicine environments and that kind of thing. Occasionally, maybe you'd see a specialist somewhere, an internal medicine provider or something like that. But most of them kind of start similarly, kind of that general practice model.
Yeah.
And everybody wants, when we get out, I mean, most of us just want to help the world. We want access to. I mean, we want to provide our care, what we consider to be a high standard of care, to everybody and anybody that we
Yeah.
can. And that's sort of our initial, most of us anyway. uh, Go
Tell
ahead.
me, tell me, I'm curious, like when did you start like not taking insurance? Like, what made you make that shift?
Yeah.
And I'm curious, secondarily, like, how was your work-life balance after making that shift?
Oh, it's night and day. I have to say, I left my practice in 2018 because of insurance related issues. And then I decided to move to a different location where I would become a community, provider, like a country doc type dude. What I found out, though, unfortunately, in that location that I was at, it was in the state of Vermont. Sorry, Vermont, if anybody out there is listening. Uh, it was kind of one of those situations where the majority of the patients who weren't being seen by other providers that were already established there were patients that were Medicaid, so in that state, lower reimbursements, significantly lower reimbursements. And also, they were patients who other providers did not want to see. I just talked to my parents this morning, and in the state of Pennsylvania, a lot of the systems like UPMC, which is University of Pittsburgh, they screen their patients before they even let them into the practice. So there's a lot of sort of picking, who's good.
Screening for like health
If
issues
they're a good fit
or
for the
insurance?
practice,
Like,
it's both. It's
yeah,
both. It's what insurance they have so that those people can predict their reimbursements. It's the complexity of that patient, how many diagnoses they have, and even going as far as like compliance and if the people
yeah,
are going to be problem patients for the practice in some way or not. It's crazy to think about, but as a result, I moved to that location kind of thinking I was going to be a, family medicine provider and all that kind of thing. And what I ended up getting was all the people who didn't have access to care anywhere else. But it had zero, like next to no resources, unfortunately, at the same time. So
right.
I'm thinking, oh, natural medicine, I'm going to do all this cool stuff. It's like we can't even afford supplements or any kind of natural stuff. I barely, feed myself. And, the insurance company covers pharmaceuticals. So the guy before me who I inherited the practice space from there, it was a lot of drugs. It was just a lot of drugs and a lot of scheduled substances. I was like stepping into a pretty hard situation there. So,
It's challenging.
needless to say, that was sort of what pushed me out of insurance was just kind of unfortunately a string of sort of failures and kind of having a goal that I wanted to achieve in terms of who I saw and who I supported and being a community doc and all those kind of things and really just realizing I wasn't going to be able to make a living and be a sole provider for my family and all that kind of thing doing that. And not to mention it was going to be way harder on my psyche for a lot of reasons. And we had
I
an
want to
outrageous amount of staff.
just
Yeah.
back up a minute, right? Because
Yes.
you made a really good point when you said that like practices will screen for patients. And
Hmm.
I think that that is a really good point. Like there's going to be some patients out there that take offense to that comment, right? That they get
Yeah.
screened essentially, that either their insurance isn't a quality insurance, so it doesn't reimburse the provider.
Hmm.
Or, I mean, the problem patients, there are those out there, right, that we screen through and try to sift through if we can. However, the insurance reimbursement, I was just visiting with another doctor the other day, and he was saying that like his insurance contracts every year that they negotiate, there's no negotiation in that, by the way. Like the
Hmm.
insurance just sets the price and they tell you like, oh, and this year I'm paying you $40 less per visit, or $10 less per visit. And in a time when, we have record inflation, the cost of goods is going up everywhere. And
Hmm.
and then you're working the same amount. Your rent is going up, your malpractice is going up, everything, your utilities are going up. The cost of, hiring providers or hiring staff is going up, yet your insurance reimbursements are lower. So I just want to put that out there for patients that it's not the greed of doctors. Like they're not able to raise their prices. They're just trying to keep their head above water. And
True.
that's why they
Yeah.
get really, really picky with who they accept. Like, you have Aetna? Sorry. You
Yeah.
have United Healthcare? Maybe not. Those are some of the two that I have heard word on the street are historically low paying, insurance carriers.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, there's a lot of reasons. It really is a systemic issue. That's what we're kind of trying to get at with this whole discussion is that a lot of these issues are really systemic. They're not at the fault of the individual by any stretch. I mean, some individuals certainly let's just say they don't necessarily help the cause very much. They
Yeah.
because, provider burnout's a thing too. So some people do become complacent, and there's a lot of issues that kind of come out of the system. And when you're asked to see 4 patients an hour on the 15 or on the 10 or something crazy, I
Yeah.
mean, that's enough to burn anybody out. You're seeing 20 patients plus a day. I mean, in our chronic illness practice, have you ever seen 10, 20 patients a day? I've
Never.
never, and that's not even the maximum. That's just, they'll see more than that even. That's just a number on average, that gets thrown out there. But so yeah, it's not really the fault of anybody in particular, but it does make it very difficult. And access is sort of the other main principle we wanted to kind of discuss here is that unfortunately the way the system operates, access can be very difficult for a lot of people. And the insurance companies have, well, in some ways, I guess they've sort of, we've made changes in the last 10 years, I guess, with Obamacare and everything, where we were sort of all kind of told that we have to get insurance. And so we do, we all go to our market and we all pick it out and that kind of thing. And then we're told that we're not going to be denied for insurance coverage, at least for pre-existing conditions and all that kind of thing. And so they started off, well, I won't get into that, but they started off trying to do one thing and it kind of became a different thing. And the thing that it is now is that almost everybody is really technically required to hold insurance. But what does that insurance get you? And I think that's where some of the problems come in and why some people, even as consumers, not just providers, have considered and started to move to cash model. And so that's kind of an interesting idea. So one concept, though, just to consider when you're thinking, okay, why would a person with insurance coverage go pay cash for something? Well, there's the outrageous deductibles that are there for a lot of these lower premium models. There is the choice that they may have in provider. They may not have a choice within the insurance system. There's the
Exactly.
fact that what the companies, well, the systems, I guess I should say, like the hospitals charge the individual person, it's actually a lot higher than what they would charge somebody for cash pay out of pocket because you bill the insurance the maximum amount you think you can get from them, and you're never going to get that back. And if you translate the amount that you bill to insurance to the consumer, it's outrageous how much you're asked to pay for.
Yeah. When you look at your itemized bill from the hospital and you find out you paid, $100 for a Tylenol tablet, like
Yeah.
that. I mean, that's an exaggeration. I
Yeah. In the
mean,
hospital, you might,
maybe,
though.
maybe,
Yeah.
but I'm not sure. Yeah, it's a wild world out there as far as insurance, what insurance gets billed. But then insurance will come back and negotiate the price, right? So the hospital might bill a certain for a certain procedure, and then
Mhm.
insurance will say, no, I'm not going to pay that. I'll pay you a third of that, or I'll pay you a half of that. And
Mhm.
and then the hardship back on the hospital is that they can't collect the remainder from the patient. So
Right.
and when the very first year that I was in practice treating complex chronic illness, I did kind of jump into that a little bit, even though I was a little more broad than I am now. I remember that some insurance companies, if patients had met their deductible, then, or not met their deductible, met their maximum out of pocket, they just said, you can't bill this patient now. Like, I just didn't get paid for like 5 visits in a particular patient because she had reached her maximum with that insurance, but I
Wow.
wasn't allowed to even collect on that. So,
Wow.
how is it that you can be contract and then not even be allowed to collect from the patient when the insurance won't cover it?
Oh,
It
there's some issues here that need to be addressed. And not all insurance companies are equal, certainly. I know some have gotten some negative press lately, like United, and I'll talk about some of my I have some experience with United too, even just as an outside provider. I've tried to prescribe medications to that company that could be life-saving for somebody or could really drastically improve their quality of life. Even they in one case they paid out of pocket for those medications and they were proven to be effective, but they didn't fit the perfect algorithm, so to speak. And I know, in no way does it ever justify going out and harming a human being over any of this, by the way. So I'm definitely not condoning that. But it is true that there's a lot of frustration amongst consumers and folks that are part of these insurance companies. And so I think most of us have gotten to the point that we're like, well, insurance probably is good for like emergency care most of the time. So if you get a low premium kind of moderate or reasonable deductible plan, maybe you can kind of hold off there. But the care that you may need though, maybe it's worth looking in cash modeling. And what does that really look like, and why might that be better for some people? Well, one thing we know is that people are starting to seek these things more as far as cash, and there's certain fields of medicine that consumers are seeking more cash services than others. Like for example, cosmetics. Well, yeah. Are you
Always,
really gonna always
always.
aesthetics? Are
Yeah.
people really gonna, is insurance really gonna cover that, facial or whatever you're gonna get? It's not gonna happen.
Botox for headaches, maybe, but
Yeah.
not Botox
Yeah.
for your lips.
Yeah. And you could argue those things are elective, I suppose. And that's okay. It's like cosmetics maybe aren't life and death. But what about chronic illness? What about what we do? Why is that life and death? Well, sometimes it might be. But also, is it quality of life? Is it, and that's the other piece of it is wellness. Even if you're not talking about chronic illness, people are seeking medical care where they can go see a doctor occasionally who's really good at what they do, who spends more than 15 minutes with them, and they go see him once a year just to simply
Right.
get a checkup and a check-in and make sure that their health is tip top, and they're perfectly happy to pay out of pocket once a year versus excessive premiums and high deductibles and getting thrown through the system where you're waiting for the next specialist, punting to the next specialist, punting to the next specialist. So it's kind of a crazy game. But anyway, so where we're at now, cash is sort of king. How has it made your life? Has it made your life easier as a provider too? Has your burnout potential reduced? What would you say in terms of quality of life as a cash provider versus a insurance provider?
It took a dramatic improvement when I started taking cash, mainly
Mm.
because you don't have to deal with the billing, right? You don't have,
Yeah.
it's not uncommon to submit it to insurance, they reject it, submit it again, they reject it, submit it again. You have to appeal sometimes to get paid. That all costs money. You have to hire a whole extra person just to process payments to
Oh
the,
yeah.
which, every extra
I think
person,
we had like two or three, like in one of my
yeah,
practices. We had
it's not
several.
uncommon.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah, because
so
one was good at one thing, one was good at the other thing, and it's like, anyway, yeah.
exactly. And
Yeah.
and I will tell you that I wrestle with this ethical dilemma almost every day of my life, right? Like
Mm.
because I know that there are a subset of patients out there that cannot afford my care. And that makes me really sad. I
Yeah.
feel like my prices are pretty reasonable, like given, across the board from what
Oh yeah, they
other
are.
providers that do what I do, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like my prices are pretty reasonable. And at the same time, it still eliminates a huge sector of the population, right? And so I
Yeah.
wrestle with that and I want to take insurance. Like the bleeding heart in me, the compassionate
Yeah.
person wants to take insurance.
I know.
However, when I did the calculation, I have to see about 3 times the amount of patients I do now to make the same amount of money. And I can't imagine.
Yeah.
I can't imagine. Like
Yeah.
if I did the insurance model, I would have to see patients every 20 to 30 minutes to be able to fit everybody in my day. And I can't even get through meds and sups and what happened with since the last visit in 20 minutes, right? Like we got to have like as you know when you're in these appointments, it's not like just this cut and dry standard straightforward cases. You have to tease out what's going on, like anyway. So
Yeah.
my quality of life improved. My paycheck didn't necessarily improve. It just kind of stayed the same, which is a whole nother issue. However, my quality of life improved, right?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah,
That's important. It's
it is
important. I
important.
mean, because we have a shortage of providers in general out there in the world. We have a shortage of providers doing this type of medicine generally as well. I'd say, yeah, in some cases, you can't, like I said, you can't blame the individual for trying to take care of themselves or their family in any system that works or doesn't work for them. So there's nothing inherently evil on the cash model, nothing inherently evil from the people that continue to take insurance. It's
Yeah.
all just doing our best, so to speak, amidst the adversities, the turmoil that's out there.
Yeah. And I
So
sure appreciate my colleagues that too take insurance and they just see
absolutely,
patients in a more acute model, they see them more frequently, which I can appreciate, and you can probably attest to this in a cash pay model, you feel like there's kind of that time period after the appointment when I'll field some phone calls and I'll, have, a little bit increased care, right, for that patient because they might have an adverse reaction. They might not know where to source the supplements. So I have that luxury of being able to visit with the patient outside of that time.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're in an insurance model, it's basically make an appointment, make an appointment, make an appointment,
Right.
which is not wrong. They have to do that because they just don't have time
No,
for,
I mean, ideally, I would just tell everybody to make an appointment all the time, but
yeah, ideally, right?
so,
Yeah. But
ideally, but
sometimes you
it
have to
does get
make
a
that.
little excessive, and they do feel like you're kind of nickel and diming, and it is a fine line. Most of us, I think, we're mindful when we're doing cash with people. We really are. I think we're mostly trying our best not to make to get our appropriate compensation for our expertise and the time that we spend. And we do spend a lot of time outside of the visit too. And most of us only really charge face to face. Now there are concierge models out there too. I was in a concierge practice briefly that was an insurance model, so there was a monthly membership fee, and then that compensated for the lack of or the delay in insurance reimbursements pretty much. And so there are a lot of hybrid models out there too. And some of those allow kind of unlimited, doctor contacts, but they probably are pretty expensive if they're like a membership for a year. You can get same day appointments. You can come in whenever you want to. Hopefully you're well otherwise though.
Yeah, I think that the concierge model works really great if you have a practice of mostly the walking well, as we call it,
Yeah,
you
true.
know, and not in a chronic illness practice. I mean, I feel like that would burden me quickly if I had like concierge
You
practice.
wouldn't be seeing a lot of people. I think that what it comes down to, once again, it's an access issue. You're
It's
like,
an access issue.
if you're really going to do that, the amount that you're going to charge is going to be probably outprice a lot of people, and you're going to spend a lot of time on much less people. So you may have a very abbreviated practice, and I'm not saying that's completely wrong either. It's just that like
Yeah,
if we're trying to find a balance here in terms of how accessible we are to the world at large. If we are feeling like we're doing something unique and it's something that's really needed, and we talked about statistics of chronic illness and how important this really is and how we all feel about it, then yeah, it doesn't always work unless you are treating the ultra rich. And we know that the chronic illness especially, does not know
yeah,
uh, poverty versus exuberance or whatever, yeah,
yeah.
opulence, whatever you want to call it. It's just like you could be the richest person on the planet, and you can't really get away from
Chronic illness.
chronic illness completely. Not where we're standing right now in the world, unfortunately.
And
So
you talked about the time outside of a visit, and I just want to kind of briefly touch on that. I don't think patients have any idea that the amount of time it takes to like do small tasks, right? I've actually started, and at first it was awkward. I have to say it was kind of awkward, and I would have never done it in my first few years in practice. But now that I feel like I'm more seasoned, I like start like, oh, you want to have a sleep study, or we're going to do this, or we're going to send over this referral. I've started doing those in the appointment. I want patients to see, like, and sometimes it's just this awkward long pause while I'm filling out paperwork or while I'm, you know, inputting the form on the computer or ordering a supplement from a supplement company or something like that on their behalf. And they have to see the amount of time that it takes. Like, it's not, we aren't an endless resource of time.
no,
And sometimes they're shocked at like, wow, it's taking you so long. Like I'll do prior auths while they're sitting in the office. Like
yeah,
you can sit here, I'll do this prior auth, we'll be on hold. I'll take your case while I'm on hold and
multitasking.
I'll do the prior auth while you're there. And for them to see that I just sat on hold for 40 minutes waiting to do their prior auth, they're like, "Oh my gosh. This is what you
Yeah,
have to do to get a prior auth?" And
yeah.
and the hoops I have to jump through? Yeah, it really is.
Behind the scenes, we either have a
Behind the
bunch
scenes.
of staff to do it or we don't. And the more staff we have, probably the more expensive we end up being because we have to cover the staff. The less staff we have, the more we do ourselves.
I
So
know it's a conundrum, right? It's really a conundrum. And so, I mean, I sit there and really like it's hard if you have a staff do a prior auth because there's certain
it is.
nuances about the case that like if I want to really get that approved, I have to be able to make my case. And my staff is often, it's in the chart note, but they don't quite know what to tease out of the chart note to get that approved. Whereas I
I
feel like,
know you can send them like really brief sort of summaries, but there's always that that you're sort of more up and close and personal and to the situation. So the likelihood of getting coverage is going to still be higher if you just do it. But and you can certainly charge for that time of prior auth, and some people do. But yeah, you just see the whole point though is that most of the time, most of us aren't trying to nickel and dime. We actually do quite a bit outside, and so the flat rate sort of a face-to-face payment is actually not that bad. And if you really compare to other specialists out there in the world, I mean, I think on average most specialists charge between 800 and 1,000 an hour. And I've seen it even more because I went to an ENT once, spent less than 15 minutes with them, and the charge was $999, and
Wow.
that was out of pocket, and I even have insurance. So you see, sometimes we don't really think about those things when those people are in the system. We get a weird bill sometimes, and we're like, "Oh, that's kind of not cool," but I'll put it on a payment plan and kind of credit card it away. But really, the rates that most of us are charging are actually much lower than the equivalents of a system specialist.
And for
So
a 15 minute,
for a 15-minute, honestly.
yes, there was something in our local Facebook group where people were basically saying, how much does it cost for cash price for this doctor? Primary care visits. About $550 is what an average, I believe it was a new patient visit. So that's billed at a higher rate. But a new patient visit for primary care, I was like, wow, that's a
Yeah,
lot.
and
Like
how long are they spending for 550? Yeah, I mean,
right. I mean, I
good
would I would
question.
hope about a half hour to 45 minutes as a new
I would
patient,
hope so.
even in
Yeah.
even in that conventional
So
model,
that
which
that
is
puts it around that 800 to 1,000 really at the
right.
end of the day.
And there you're talking about a fair compensation,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
yeah, it's something we will wrestle with the rest of our lives, right? So what do you do? What do you do when people can't afford your care? Do you
Well,
ever
one thing that we're trying to do, I mean, in some cases we do clearly discount people, and we kind of can allow a certain amount of sliding scale in most cases. Most practices can allow a certain amount of it. Sometimes there is a capacity, of course, because if that's all
yes,
your patients, then that's your rate. So there's
right.
that issue. I mean, just as an aside, one of the reasons why I like doing some of these talks out there too is that the more we can sort of educate the community and get some of these ideas out there, our hope is that because I can't be everywhere at once either, even if I wanted to be, my hope is that more people, more practitioners, more people entering the functional world or otherwise are going to have more ideas that are effective and more access through those means. And so that's kind of my cop out answer first, but my second answer
Cop out.
is
That's
that
that's a fair
yeah,
answer.
well, that's one reason why we do these things, and we don't like charge for them either. This is all for the most part we all kind of generate proverbial free content in our time. It's not something that's being paid for, but it's not something we just all want to do out there. So that's number one. But beyond that, you can allow a certain amount of uh, lower rates for people, and usually most practices will want sort of proof of income kind of things and sort of see if it really makes sense kind of to keep them on a sliding scale. And oftentimes I'll work with them to try to give them the best plan I can give them that'll last the longest between visits. If we can't see them quite as frequently, I'll try to kind of work it. It may be, I try my best not to ever dilute care as a result of these restrictions, but I will operate slightly differently in some cases. But it's not necessarily what I call abbreviated medicine. It just is a sort of more, I'm going to meet you where you are kind of situation
Yes.
in
Yeah.
terms of how much you can see me and how long you can see me and how much you're able to pay, that kind of thing. And so if you have a lot of, that's the good part about if you have a lot of patients that do have enough money to pay you at your rates, that does sort of give space for those other people in the community who can't afford those rates to kind of come in. So
Yeah.
there is a model there where you can practice ethically if you want to be, if you want to be, as it
Right.
comes down to. So I think I see a lot of people that do that though, actually. So it's not necessarily uncommon. I very rarely see folks in the cash pay model in chronic illness really trying to take you for your worth, I
Yeah,
rarely
no,
really.
they seem really appreciative. That
Yeah.
is, and that's something that we should talk about too. Like just having a little bit of, I hate that term skin in the game, but
Mhm.
it does succinctly state what I'm trying to convey is that there has to be an energy transfer. A doc told me a long time ago that for some of his patients that were really couldn't afford his care, like they brought him banana bread. They
Hmm.
brought him, there was a trade, there was an energy transfer, right? He didn't just do the work for free. She gave what she could. And and I do appreciate that a lot. And it kind of stuck with me. There has to be an energy transfer. So it, unfortunately, I feel like we do get, well, fortunately and unfortunately, the access to care, lack of access to care. But the good news is that we get patients that are usually really invested in their care. Like they,
Absolutely.
they listen to what we're saying. They come in already, they're pretty savvy. I'm sure you have
Mhm.
really savvy patients, right? They've studied
Definitely.
stuff. They've been to a slew of doctors that they're well researched, right? And
Oh
so
yeah.
I appreciate them. And I feel like they come in and we're kind of on this even keel, right? And they want something from me and, in exchange, they're willing to pay for it.
Yeah, I
And
mean, honestly, almost in any realm of complex medicine, complex illness or anything, it's like you kind of have to be a little bit of your own advocate in some ways, or you have to have somebody advocating for you in some regards, because, and I'm not saying you need to go Dr. Google everything under the sun, but there are a lot of legitimate resources to learn and understand more about your body and your illness and this kind of thing. And since I've been doing a lot of these videos, I have gotten a lot of patients who've watched all my videos and they kind of already know a little bit about what I'm going to
yeah,
do with them. And I don't, it actually saves a ton of time and it saves a ton of money for them too, honestly, because I don't have
for
to
sure.
go and literally explain everything under the sun. And so I do really think that another goal of ours here, at least from my perspective, is to try to empower patients to be as much of a part of it as a part of the process as they can be. Because I'm not saying that people aren't like that. It's just that the whole dictatorial, passive sort of medical model that we've seen in the past, where it's like, I know better than you. This is what you got to do. And I'm not saying everybody operates that way, but when you have 15 minutes with somebody, sometimes you got to be a dictator, I guess. You got to just be like, okay, I'm going to give you this. This is what I think's going on. And then the other front, they could say, oh, but I'm really sick. It's not working. Oh, no, you're okay. I'm going to gaslight you really quick so that we can get out of the room and kind of move on.
Yeah.
So all those sort of negative, type of things, I think can largely be avoided. But if we just if we just take some time, but also I think if you come in even to one of those type of visits. Like if I go to my insurance provider here, I'll be like, okay, these are just my needs. I'm gonna just list them out real quick here, one, two, three, four. And if I keep it really simple, it actually goes quite smooth. But that's because I know kind of what I
Yes.
need and I kind of have some idea. So anyway, I was just trying to say, yes, I really do appreciate our patients. I think when you run a cash model, you get a lot more of the engagement and uh, getting people really part of the process. Because our job as docs is really just to help you too. It's just to give you the best information we can, given the circumstances, and also allow you to make the choices to some degree.
Yeah.
So, informed
You're
consent.
absolutely right, though. I love the word choice of engagement. Like patients
Yeah.
are engaged, they're engaged
Mhm.
in their healthcare. They want to be there. They want your opinion. They're not afraid to share if they don't like your opinion, if they want to go a
Absolutely. I
different
appreciate
route.
the honesty. I appreciate the
Yeah.
criticism.
And it's a back and forth, I'm like,
It
are
is.
you ready to make this step?
Hmm.
Am I meeting you where you're at? Like, how do you feel about this plan? And sometimes they'll say, I feel like it's a little too much for me right now. And we back off. Or they say, I'd really like to step in a little deeper into this, like a little quicker. I'm like, okay. And trying to gauge that, right? And
Yeah.
as you know, it takes sometimes just being straightforward with the patient and saying, where are we at? Do we want to move faster? Do we need to move slower? And I always incorporate a little bit of time into my visits for like chit chat. I want to know what's happening in your family. I want to know and this is unbillable time, by the way. Like I don't bill for, like, I kind of know how much time I'm just talking about your kids and talking about, the house you purchased or
Yeah. I try not to
whatever,
factor
right?
that in too much.
I try not to factor that into the appointment time,
Yeah.
right? Like that they're the billable time. However, it's really valuable time, and people don't
It
even realize
is.
how valuable time it is. Because if you're moving and you're not feeling well, and your kids are changing schools and all this stuff, like I know that this isn't the time to lean in deep, right? We need to like give you a crutch to get through that time, and then we'll start. parsing things out when the move is settled. And that's just
Yeah.
an, if you're going through extremely stressful times, I don't come in really heavy with treatments, right? Treatments that I think might, shake things up, like
Yeah.
detoxing, that sort of thing.
Yeah, you
Um,
have to consider all that. And I mean, just building simple old school rapport with the patient is kind
yes.
of a lost art. And I think it's important because, as like I said, I always dreamed of being kind of the community country doc kind of setup where, I was part of a community, I was a member of that community, people knew me, and I was there to help them, and I knew them in more than just
Right.
medical ways. And it was kind of this nice relationship. And it was always kind of this sort of dreamy thing. And the reality is, I think we're seeing less of that. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but it's not quite in the same level of connection. But if you're able to establish that connection, I think it's very important for people because a lot of these patients have really lost trust and faith and just they've lost something along the way within the conventional medical system, and so they usually come to us kind of a little bit traumatized and a little bit kind of you have to kind of work them back a little bit to be able to get because I mean there's just so much that has gone wrong in some cases, and yeah, I really do appreciate all that, and that's what we're really trying to do in most of these cases, spending more time with people too, is like also just to get to know you. And yeah, it's true. You don't heal quite as effectively if you're chronically stressed and your autonomic nervous system is always dysregulated, and you have multiple levels of family trauma and other things. And that's where that whole meet the people where they are is really important as a concept, is that you're not going to get, once you know all that, you're not going to give them like 10 things to do or something.
Right.
Whereas, maybe one of them is like super robust and they can just handle 10 things, and that's fine. And you'll know that pretty quickly too.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
Just
yeah,
getting a
no, it's
sense for
part of
where they're
it.
at. Um,
Exactly.
so, so I'm curious, like as far as like when you're trying to talk to patients about the value of cash pay, and and I know that you're saying like you try to make, what's the correct word choice? Like some longevity between appointments, right? Like you're trying to be mindful about not having to require them back in the next month. So you give them a few things to work on over the course of maybe 2, 3, 4 months, right? Before you require that they see you again. Um, I'm curious, like, how do you interact with them in the meantime? Like, where I'm getting at is like portals and phone calls
Yes, all that kind of
and
stuff. Because inevitably,
hot
I-
topic,
and believe me, I always tell patients that the way that this works the best is through direct communication or regular communication. And it is kind of a conundrum, unfortunately, if you're like, I really would ideally like to see you every 2 weeks, but I don't know that that's going to, be affordable for you, unfortunately. And it's like, what do we do with that? Well, we can set a relative roadmap. We can spend our time up front and kind of get some idea of where we're going. And we can allow, and this is a fine line, we can allow reasonable sort of portal type check-ins, but you cannot do medicine over portals.
you can't.
You can't.
Yeah,
It's kind of more like, tell me if you're doing okay. Give me a little bit of a brief one sentence. Yeah, I'm cool. And if not, do we need a visit earlier? And sometimes a 15-minute visit is quite economical and quite efficient in terms of getting everything back on track. And
right.
so these check-ins for me are really means to determine, can we wait that 4 weeks or 6 weeks as we sort of suggested, or do we need to talk earlier? And if we need to talk earlier, let's just be really sure through that we need to talk. So I won't be like doing medicine over. I'll be like, no, you need to visit then, right? So that's how I try to operate. But I've not always been this smooth with it. Let's just say that. We've all been there, I think.
We've all been there. I feel like we've learned, right? It's one of those things when the portals came out, we were like, this is the
Hmm.
most amazing thing. I can just communicate, because as soon as you get on the phone with a patient, I don't know about you, but it's usually a 10 to 30-minute phone call. It's never been
Yeah.
under 10. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's excessive of 30 just to try to suss out what's going on and try to keep them things under wraps. And I'm pretty good now with my boundaries on saying, hey, we're gonna, stick with the topic at hand. We're not gonna go
Yeah.
into a mini
Right.
appointment, right?
Right.
However, like I learned my lesson through the portal, and like, and if you answer the questions, right, then they will just ask more questions.
Yes.
Um, And
Before
I
you know it,
don't,
it's like texting almost. It's like a texting back and forth that just lasts
yes,
infinitely long.
infinitely long. And I don't mind, and I so appreciate it for what it is. And at the
Right.
same time, I realized that I was spending 3 hours a night responding to
Yeah.
portal messages. And one
Yeah.
of the most freeing things for me is when I no longer like when I'm like my assistant takes care of the portal messages, and that's where we had to go because it unfortunately you get a little pushback, like, why won't you just answer my question? I just
Right.
want to know if I should do this other therapy. And it's like, well, it sounds really reasonable that I should just give you a one-liner and answer your question, but it's really nuanced. So, and hence that's really more appropriate for your next visit.
Yeah, and that's kind of one of those things, like I said, perhaps in a concierge practice where there were a lot less patients overall in the practice or something. Maybe
Yeah.
I still don't think it's good medicine, but there might be some space more for those types of interactions and that kind of thing. But for most of us that have, moderate to some of us have high volume, practices, it does get pretty overwhelming. I mean, if you're seeing 8 to 10 complicated patients a day, and then you're getting messaged by 8 to 10 or 20 complicated patients a day. How do you have enough
Yeah,
hours in the day to do anything? You kind of
I
lose
don't.
your hours pretty quick, and before you know it, a already excessive, what feels like an excessive 10-hour day becomes a 12-hour day, becomes a 14-hour day, and it's like, ooh,
I can't do
that's
14-hour days anymore.
that's burnout ready to happen.
10 to
And
12 hours is about the maximum I can do in a day. Like if you see patients all day, like what does your window look like for how many hours you see patients in a day?
yeah, well,
Start to stop.
for the number of patient hours, I guess I should say that would be maybe 6 to 7
Okay.
hours straight for patient care, which doesn't sound like a lot, but actually that's something I learned over time. That is a lot.
That is a lot.
For
And then how
the
many hours will you work caring for those uh, patients, wrapping up those patients, like outside time?
Oh, I know. It feels like there's at least 2 hours of working outside, probably three realistically every day. It's either going to be the charting and the preparation of the treatment plan, or it's going to be doing administrative things, which I'm kind of doing every chance I get, pretty much. So if I get on my computer, I know I'm a really early person, by the way. If I get on my computer at 5 a.m., which is not uncommon, uh, I'll be working kind of almost straight through to 8 a.m. and I might take a small break to take my kids to school and do kind of things like this. And then I'm right back at it at 9 a.m. to or to 9 up to 9:30 a.m. or whenever I'm starting to see patients for the day. And then that
Right.
kind of continues all the way through to the end of my day, and then wash, rinse, and repeat. So that's a lot. Now, could I ease that up a little bit? I've definitely made changes that have made it easier in some ways, and maybe there's more that I could do. But the fact is that with these patients, even I feel I have to do some research for them sometimes, or I have to do something to better understand because they are complicated patients without straightforward answers. And so it does kind of drive me to continue learning too. So it's not something I'm, super, upset about. So I haven't changed my system because it sort of allows me to build on, how effective I can be as a provider too. And then,
Absolutely.
documentation and legal stuff, I guess, but that's not, interestingly, that's not my top reason.
Right. No, that makes sense. And I see patients about 6 hours in a day,
Hmm.
face to face with patients. And then I probably average about 4 to 5 hours after patients. That's research, phone calls, referrals,
Yeah.
you know,
I'd say three
charting.
hours is my lower end. I
Yeah.
should say it could be a lot more. I kind of have to cut myself off. I think the best thing you can do in this game is to find some boundaries and sort of stick to them. At least that's my opinion. And in that regard, you can pick up on things the next day, even if you unless it's an absolute emergency. But we're not like an emergency urgent care type situation. So,
Exactly.
hopefully we're not seeing stuff that's like literally life and death on a regular basis. So usually the individual can wait till the next day for most types of things. So that's kind of how I operate usually anyway.
Okay. So I have another question for you, and I'm kind of shifting
Please.
just a little bit. But What do you think of, like, do you spend a lot of time trying to get your patients scholarships to see you? What are the ways, what are some creative ways that patients can get financing to come see you that for patients that can't afford it?
Yeah, I mean, those things do exist in certain regards. I can't say that there are always, there's definitely not unlimited resources in any of those areas, but
Right.
you might be able to get something though. Like some of the Lyme foundations for tick-borne illness, I think, have been really helpful. Like Limelight in the Bay Area there is really cool, for example. Props to them. And so there are several others too that I'll look for people and sort of see what I can do, and if there's some way I can kind of do my part in that. That's not something I'm gonna charge them for my time for. If I can do it, we'll do it. But unfortunately, I haven't come up with a lot of resources for the type of patients that I see. There's certain types of patients in the chronic illness world that might have a little bit more, and I'm not saying it's perfect, not even close.
Sure.
But there are some that just aren't really qualified for one reason or another to the level of care that they really need, and the costs out of pocket that they're going to probably have to spend to achieve that care. So it could be better. How do you operate there? Have you found any successes?
Several grants, have been made available to my patients, and I really appreciate that. Like you mentioned Limelight, and they have been fantastic with my patient population.
Mhm.
Really generous in times that, like, especially when we're trying to go for labs, when we're trying to, that are really expensive. Sometimes just covering the cost of care, like whether it's
Mhm.
through me or supplements. So that's been really helpful. I just had a patient give me provide she's patients, you know this. Patients will bring you resources, right? They're like, "Oh, I
Mhm.
found all these grants that they can apply for." And I think that's amazing. So what I will probably do in the comments here on this podcast, Jamie, is I'll list those grants that are available to patients.
Appreciate it.
All those grants usually require a letter from us. They have to be
Mhm.
individually addressed to that grant. And the body of the letter is usually the same, right? What is their diagnosis? What are their needs? You kind of speak to that. So,
Yeah.
again, I mean, I usually write these letters at no cost to the patient. I've
Mhm.
spent days filling out grant applications, especially like right before a grant is due. Then I'll
Yeah.
just dedicate a Saturday and start writing letters for patients. I've even
Mhm.
used to even go so far as to contact all of those patients and say, "Hey, there's a grant you might be able to apply for, and I'm
Yeah.
sitting down writing letters today. Do you want me to write you one?" And so,
Yeah,
anyway,
usually we'll provide that information up front for people, and yeah, so sometimes sometimes people won't get into the practice for whatever reason just because of those expenses, and we always feel really bad about it, but we always have referrals and other places that people can seek care too if those things don't kind of come into fruition.
exactly. Yeah,
And I've even offered in some cases, because you can do consultations too in some cases with other providers, and it's not going to cost a lot of your time, and you're not going to have to do all the fancy paperwork. You could spend 15 to 30 minutes with another provider talking about things that they might want to think about and how they can operate, and it can be incredibly efficient. And even if you're charging for some of that time, like I usually cap it off at 15 minutes or something, it's
sure.
not unreasonable amounts of time. You can get a lot of that information out to those other providers too if they're willing to talk and listen, right? So I do try to do a lot of that collaborative stuff as well, and I really do enjoy talking to other people in other communities that really do care and kind of want to help, and get them some framework of understanding, and
Yeah.
that's another thing that we do too,
That's great.
or
And
I do.
I've started to do the consult model as well, just because there's only one of us, right? And
Yeah.
so and I usually learn something from them, and if we can have an exchange of ideas, that's always more helpful. Another thing I've been kicking around is the idea of, like, basically getting donations, right? Or
Oh yeah.
contributions for the sake
Yeah.
of adopting a patient. And like I've kicked this idea around for a good couple of years, and I'm slowly making action on it. But everything from starting a nonprofit to
hmm
potentially being able to take in funds, or even just like crowdfunding, is that what they call it? Just like doing something that's very transparent to where people know that like I'm not paying, you
Right.
know, XYZ out of this account.
Right.
It's going for patient care. It's dedicated for patient care. But
Yeah.
again, that takes a lot of time and energy for me to crowdsource, funds
Yeah.
for a patient and or a series of patients, right? But in a perfect model, I would love to be able to treat these patients all day long and, at very low
Yeah.
cost to them. Um,
I've seen stuff like that before. There was a business somewhere in California that essentially they had two businesses that were in the same building. One of them was a nonprofit, and one of them was their other business, whatever you want to call it, their for-profit or whatever normal business.
right,
And the nonprofit would provide funds for folks that couldn't afford the other part of their business. And so like they kind of were under the same roof even, which was really fascinating. And so apparently they were doing that legally, so there's a way to do it. I think you're going to probably end up seeing more of that because I think all of us have recognized, at least in this field, that there are a higher number of consumers, as mentioned, patients in this case, seeking cash practice because of the choice or the needs, individual
right.
needs that they have. And the folks that aren't going to be able to afford that are going to need another way to attain access. And one of those ways is the nonprofit sort of generating money donation through donations or other means model. And I think it's a really great way to go about it. And I think I appreciate any people out there that would donate to. And I think that's the reason why I am kind of excited about not that chronic illness is on the rise. I'm not excited about that at all, but rather I think the recognition of it is on the rise, the understanding that this is a real issue and that the system isn't going to just drastically change overnight to accommodate it. We're not just going to wake up one day and your local primary care provider is going to be able to handle your complicated chronic Lyme disease or something like that. I
Exactly.
I wish it were so, but so we have to get creative within the systems that we operate, and that's what I really want to see. And if any providers are out there listening to this that maybe have the funds or the means or the background to do that, if you've done the crowdsourcing or the whatever before to generate income, um, think about doing it for medicine too. I think I want to meet, I want to meet somebody that's into that. So
I
if
want to
anybody's
meet
out there,
somebody like that too. I've even wanted to start my own foundation just to help these
yeah.
these patients. I'd
Mhm.
love to start a foundation and it's similar to the limelight.org, but like
Yeah.
have it to where I can, it can pay for testing, it can pay for doctor's visits, and it's sustainable, that something that like we can see this patient through treatment. I even have some generous families right here in Central Oregon that have offered to pay for medications for families.
Wow.
Of kids that can't afford it. Like it's pretty amazing. Like
Yeah.
I probably don't ask of them enough, right? Or at all. Like I really like I'm really uncomfortable asking for money, even if it's not coming to me, it's just kind of passing from one patient to another. There's an uncomfortableness about it. But
Right.
I appreciate it. Like there's a lot of really generous people out there, and if they knew the challenges that some of our patients had, in getting proper access to care, then yeah.
Yeah. I think we're going to see more of that. And I think it's a really important topic, and I want to talk more about it in the future too, like how we could set that up, or even like I said, finding somebody who's done it and maybe
Yeah.
figuring out how it can be done within the practitioner space, or even just if you're a patient that got better from some of these practices or some of these models of medicine that are a little outside the mainstream, and but they have maybe they're fortunate to have the funds to maybe give back a little bit even. It would be really wonderful to see more of that. So, yeah, I really appreciate you bringing that up actually. So, yeah, we'll talk more about it in the future as we get more information.
Yes. And I think that we have a lot to talk about. We can probably even do another podcast on this topic because
Yeah.
in the future I want to get into the topic of kind of this hierarchy of insurance, where insurance is going. Is it going to single pay? The problems with that, sounds great. I have cautions about it.
Yeah, we
You
didn't
know?
dive into that quite yet. I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
we
yeah.
will though, because it's a really important topic. I think today was sort of just an overview of why we sort of personally chose cash in our lives, and why we don't really fault people that aren't doing that. And just to
Right.
kind of get an idea of really the reality of practicing specifically in complex chronic illness, and how it's kind of in some ways unique in terms of operating outside of the system or within the system. So I think we reached that goal for today, but there's so much more to talk about with insurance and possible changes that are on the horizon there. And I think all of us would really love to have some kind of at least hazard or emergency care on a very
Yes.
basic level. And I always thought that if I just had that and the premium wasn't ridiculous, or maybe it was, funded in some way, I would just pay cash for everything else. Because,
Yeah.
so I mean, I could see that really drastically changing the system. And there are other ways to kind of pay cash through your insurance, like a health savings account, or to pay tax free on certain things that are out of pocket. There are things I didn't really talk about, and I didn't mean to kind of ignore those today, but those are really important means too. And some folks will see me with HSAs, or pay for their supplements or things that aren't covered with health savings account as well. So there are some systems that are already in place that sort of understand that choice is important, but we still have a long ways to go, I think, for this
We do.
particular field. Because
And I feel bad. You brought something up, and I'm so sorry for interrupting you.
that's okay.
But the patients that are insurance poor, like that is something, they're paying $1,200 a month for their
Mhm.
insurance, and they can't use it. Like those are the ones that I really like. I feel that that's where my obligation,
Yeah.
and it's a constant, like I said, it's a constant wrestle, the ethics of being cash pay, but then maybe it's, better for me. Like as a provider, I won't burn out as quickly, For
Yes.
patients, they get a longer appointment. It's more thorough, potentially.
Yeah. And somebody's got to show that the model works too. I think there's always a possibility that the future of medicine has more of this, and it's a hybrid model where we have a better insurance system or something like that.
Yeah.
So some of us, I don't know. I like to think that somebody's got to pioneer the right way too in this world. And it's like, uh, for better for worse, cash pay is sort of a pioneering structure because you're not really beholden to the insurance game. You can kind of work with cutting edge medicine more. There's just so much more freedom that you have to practice is in the way that is best for that individual in front of you, is really what it
Yeah.
comes down to. So I do think it will feed the future changes of the system if we get the right data. And I would put a plug in, and I need to do this more myself too, but we need to put plug in for like publishing, case studies, doing studies in your practice if you have the means or ability to do
Mm.
so. Like there's a lot of stuff that we can do to even further legitimize this model of medicine, to try to slowly begin chipping away and integrating it into the system at large. So I wanted to put a plug in for that too, actually.
I agree. I think that slowly this model is going to be adopted. We are seeing how that conventional model is just not quite working for patients, especially the patients with complex chronic illness. So I think that as we start to adopt some of these models, we're going to see some hopefully healthy changes.
That's right.
There's that saying, change is good, transition is hell. It's
Yes,
not a lie.
that's
Not a lie.
true.
So I do think it
Okay.
might not always be as smooth as we would like, but I do
No, but it's coming. We want to see momentum. If we see momentum, that's a good thing. And I do think there's momentum right now. Things like we said before take a little while to change, but there's hope. There's hope out there. And yeah, I think we need to just all continue this conversation as a society at large, as individuals at a community level, everywhere within all our structures, our systems, or whatever that we're part
Yeah,
of. So, with that, I think we'll conclude for today, but we'll be back again next week or next time, whenever that may be.
okay.
And yeah, I'm excited about what we're going to talk about next. I guess we'll find out.
I know. I know. I'm excited. Is it your pick next time?
Yes. Yes,
Okay,
the
your
next
pick.
one it'll be me. Yeah, we'll see what I talk about.
Sounds good. You can let me know the couple days before.
Oh yeah, just like an hour before usually,
Yeah,
but
that's fine. That's fine.
that's
No
good. That's
problem.
enough time, of course.
Sure.
Okay,
Sure.
good. All right, everybody,
All
have a
right.
good day. I wish you all the best, and a beautiful, healthy 2025 is on the horizon. So take it easy.
Thanks, Jamie. Take care.
Thanks, Janelle. Bye bye. Thank you for listening to our podcast, Confronting the Complex, with Dr. Janelle Payne and Dr. Jamie Kunkle. As a reminder, the views, thoughts, and opinions expressed by Dr. Jamie Kunkle are solely his own and do not reflect the views, policies, or positions of Gordon Medical Associates or its affiliates. Any content, discussions, or advice shared on this podcast are independent of Gordon Medical Associates and should not be interpreted as a representation of Gordon Medical Associates. Gordon Medical Associates does not endorse or take responsibility for any statements or viewpoints expressed in this podcast. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.